It's U of L Today on 93.9 The Ville. Here's your host, Mark Hebert.
Welcome to U of L Today with Mark Hebert on 93.9 The Ville. We at the University of Louisville like to think of ourselves as the thought leader here in Louisville and the region, so hopefully this show will be thoughtful and provoke some thought, and as we talk about research and some other things going on at the University of Louisville. So on the show today, if you're a computer geek and you love talk about artificial intelligence, software development, or evolutionary algorithms, I don't know what that is either, we'll have just the guy for you. U of L engineering professor Roman Yampolskiy will be here to discuss Darwinism and the evolution of software, or lack of evolution in software. Yeah, you'll want to stick around for that one. Actually, he's pretty funny and pretty interesting guy. But first, people who have moved to Kentucky in the past few years, what states did they come from? What percentage of homes and businesses in Prospect, West Louisville, or any county in Kentucky have access to broadband internet? What's the profile of the Smoketown neighborhood close to downtown Louisville? Well, Matt Ruther is an assistant professor of urban and public affairs and the director of the Kentucky State Data Center at U of L. He's a numbers and data guy who has the answers to these questions and more. Matt, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Good to see you again. All right, what's the Kentucky State Data Center? We ought to tell folks what that is first.
So the KSDC is a Census Bureau affiliate. We work with local agencies to propagate census data and sort of help people understand what they're using and things of that nature. We've been here at U of L since 1979.
79. I didn't realize it had been that long. So basically, you take all the data from the census. Census comes out, what, every 10 years, right?
We have data all the time.
Oh, so you keep rolling it over? So
Yes,
the
yes.
census isn't just every 10 years anymore.
The decennial is, but there's always programs running every year.
Okay. And so that's what we're going to talk about this morning is some of this data that you've recently gotten. You break it down to figure out, you're a number cruncher, basically, and data guy, right? Okay. Well, let's start with broadband internet. You took a look at the numbers showing what households in Jefferson County have broadband and where those households are, who doesn't have it. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Right. So the data that came out in December of last year was the first look that we have at all the counties in Kentucky, the first data that we have on internet access and internet usage. So it's sort of exciting from a data standpoint. And we can see a really stark digital divide between northern Kentucky, so northern Cincinnati, Lexington, Louisville.
The Golden Triangle.
Exactly. And the eastern and western portions of the state. About 40 percentage points in internet access. So we typically have about 75% here, and it goes down to 40% or so in some of these eastern counties.
Yeah, I noticed there were a couple of eastern Kentucky counties that had, less than 50%. I mean, Knox, McCreary, Clinton County, down in southern Kentucky, Lee County, and eastern Kentucky.
Exactly.
So, but do those folks have dial-up connection still, the old dial-up, or do they just don't have any internet at all?
I don't look at dial-up because I don't think it counts, frankly.
Because it takes too darn long to connect?
No, it's not.
It's not a real internet connection.
It's not a real internet connection, which is why it's considered separately.
Okay, so these folks don't have broadband. They do not have access to broadband, or they don't subscribe to broadband.
So we don't actually know the answer to that question. I suspect that it's mostly access. In these rural areas, it's probably mostly that there is not access to any kind of broadband, whereas in Louisville, say, it may be more resource that there's access, but people do not subscribe because of resource scarcity.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Louisville. Again, we're talking with Matt Ruther, who's an assistant professor at U of L and also the head of the Kentucky State Data Center here at U of L. Let's talk about Jefferson County. There are pockets from the map that you sent me in Jefferson County where it doesn't look like there's hardly anybody using broadband. I mean, if you go out, basically I-65 east, just about everybody has a broadband connection and is using it.
Except the Newburgh neighborhood.
Except the Newburgh neighborhood, right, down in the south part of the county. But if you go west, there are pockets like down in Shively, and if you go way down Dixie Highway, those folks are using their broadband, but around downtown, West Louisville, Portland, those areas, it doesn't look, you're talking, what, 50%?
Less than that. Actually, maybe 35% in some of these neighborhoods. It really has to do with the ability to afford it in this case, because Spectrum and other providers, AT&T, even Google Fiber at this point, offer access in some of these places. But if people can't afford it, and of course the map of internet or broadband access in the county looks like a map of income in the county.
It does. It really does. And why is it important? Why is broadband important from your perspective?
Well, I mean, this is how we communicate now. This is where you pay your bills. This is where you get your information. We'll be doing taxes on I mean, all these things revolve around having internet access. And without it in the home, you need to go to the library, perhaps, or pay for it at a commercial establishment.
Right. Yeah. And do you see, I know this is the first look at broadband numbers in the county and in the state, so there's really nothing to compare it to. We can't say back in, 5 years ago, nobody had it in West Louisville, but now it's improved. We can't look at that, right?
Right. Next year, we'll be able to look at some changes. At this point, this is our first look, and it's really not surprising. The numbers are not particularly surprising. The pattern in the numbers, anyway. Mm-hmm. The actual numbers are sort of interesting.
Yeah. Were there any surprises at all when you looked at broadband statewide, or were there any counties, for instance, that are fairly wealthy counties that you said, you know what, I'm shocked they only got 40% broadband usage? No, not really.
Not really. No.
A lot of poor counties just didn't use it.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't even look farther east in Pike County, those areas where you have pockets in eastern Kentucky where there is some wealth, and I didn't really look and see.
I think they just don't have access.
Just don't have access. Okay.
And I should point out that this includes cellular phones. So.
Oh, okay.
Cell phones are included in broadband here.
Okay. So what you're telling me is there are a lot of people who may have cell phones. They're ubiquitous in West Louisville, the southern part of the county, and Jefferson County, but they may not be using those phones for internet connection.
Or they may be paying for them on a prepaid basis, in which case they would not count.
Yeah, throwaway phones or whatever.
There's lots of rules here, of course.
I got you. All right, we're talking with Matt Ruther, Assistant Professor of Urban and Public Affairs at UofL and the Director of the Kentucky State Data Center. All right, let's move on and talk a little bit before we take a break about migration into and out of Kentucky. Where are folks coming from into Kentucky, and where are folks going to? Did I say that right? Where are folks coming in, where are folks going to, right?
Yes. So the ACS allows us to look at where people come from, where people go to, based at the state level. And in Kentucky has been in a little of a trouble spot because we're typically losing domestic people to other states. Mm-hmm. So we're gaining people, we're losing people, but we're losing people on average more. Our population growth is mostly through births, more births than deaths. Mm-hmm. We are gaining people from the primary state is Ohio, a couple thousand people in the last year from Ohio. We're losing people to Tennessee, Indiana, Michigan, which is sort of surprising. But there's a surprising amount of movement, mobility. So people with California, New York. I mean, there's mobility with all states.
Yeah, I kind of took a look at the states and it looked like we lost the most folks, and this was what, 2016? Was that
between 2016 2017?
Okay, so that 2-year period, we lost the most folks. It looks like to Florida.
Yeah, that would be retirees.
Right.
Yeah.
So you got that, and then you said to Michigan, as you pointed out, we lost 2,300 people out of Kentucky going to Michigan. Any analysis on why that would happen? I know you're just the numbers guy, but any clue as to why people are moving to Michigan?
It is a strange one.
And it certainly isn't the weather.
My only thought maybe was that it was job related. Although Michigan isn't really. I don't know what Michigan's economy looks like necessarily, but.
Yeah.
It was a surprise.
And we're pulling in folks, as you said, from Ohio. We got about 4,000 net gain from Ohio in that 2-year period. We've also got a bunch from Illinois. 2,300 people moved from Illinois to Kentucky.
Yeah. So the Rust Belt sort of continues to bleed down to the south in terms of in search of labor, essentially. Mm-hmm. That's what we've been seeing for years now.
So these people are just making a stopover in Kentucky before they head to Florida? Is that what's happening?
Something of that nature.
And then out west, there were several states out west. It looks like Colorado. Is that Arizona or New Mexico? I'm bad on my geography. It looks like
probably
Arizona. It's Arizona, yeah. Is that retirees?
Arizona is probably retirees.
But Colorado
is just people wanting to go somewhere.
You also sent me some information about the metropolitan statistical areas and what you call the micropolitan statistical areas in Kentucky. Why don't you explain what that is?
So metropolitan areas are the regions around cities, sort of the labor markets, if you will, where people commute in from. they're often a good proxy for how big an area is. And these are redefined every couple of years, and they were recently redefined last year. Micropolitan areas are just essentially the same thing but smaller. And Kentucky has a lot of these, like Bardstown, for example, London, Kentucky, these places that are regionally important but are not as large as, say, Louisville or Lexington.
Okay, and as I'm looking at the map here of the micropolitan and metropolitan areas, you folks on the radio can't see it obviously, but the pink areas are the metropolitan and micropolitan areas, and the light blue areas are the rural, what I would call the rural areas. And there are a lot more pink, which are metropolitan and micropolitan areas, than there are rural areas. How do you figure? We're a rural state, man, aren't we?
We're a suburban state, I think, in reality. Maybe land area wise, we're rural, but most of our people live in suburban areas. The rural counties they're just really small, for the most part, and almost 90% of America lives in urban areas now. So,
is that a shift? In other words, are more Kentuckians moving towards Bowling Green, Owensboro, Louisville, Lexington, and moving away from Estill County?
Absolutely. Although Estill County is in a metropolitan area.
Is that in Moorhead? What would that be in?
It's with Richmond, I believe.
Richmond, okay. Oh, that's true. Yeah. My geography's bad again of my 120 counties. But people
it's
are
definitely
moving?
There's a trend towards people moving towards these metropolitan areas, and also them sort of spreading out as people live further out from the core.
Okay, so taking in more counties around Lexington, Louisville, Bowling Green,
exactly.
Paducah, those areas?
Exactly.
Okay.
Having said that, of course, Louisville lost 2 counties in this particular round. So Trimble County used to be in our metropolitan area and isn't any longer.
What's it in?
It's rural now.
It's considered, okay.
And,
there are 3 counties up there considered rural. What are they? Trimble?
Carroll.
Oh, wait a minute. One's in Indiana. Okay.
Yeah.
But Gallatin County is considered part of Cincinnati, right?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
So they're sort of growing. They'll never grow together completely because the geography in there, but they're getting closer.
Well, that's the TV markets they watch. That's the only thing I ever cared about when I was in TV was who was included in the Louisville TV market.
Right, and they align really closely with those media viewing markets.
Okay. All right. Again, we're talking with Matt Ruther from the University of Louisville. Let's talk a little bit about the profile that you are doing on these neighborhoods and also a little bit on Jefferson County. There were some really interesting numbers I found. So let's talk about just the project, what the project is to kind of map data-wise these neighborhoods around Louisville.
So we are working with in partnership with Metro United Way to create these neighborhood profiles for all of the neighborhoods in Jefferson County. To my knowledge, this hasn't been done before. We've had neighborhood profiles for the urban neighborhoods, but not for the entire county. And the entire county has a whole lot more going on than just the urban neighborhoods. And so these were completed mid last year and are available on our website and on Metro United Way's website. And they're pretty extensive. A whole bunch of data on economics, demographics, health, education, a wealth of information.
How many neighborhoods are there in Jefferson County that you consider neighborhoods?
I think there's 84.
Okay.
Although don't take my word for it.
It's somewhere around 80.
It's somewhere in the 80 area.
Okay.
The way that we define
and what's considered a neighborhood? Is St. Matthews a neighborhood, or is that strikes me as an area really?
So St. Matthews
a damn
is
big neighborhood.
St. Matthews is a city actually.
Okay.
The way we define neighborhoods is at the census tract level, which is how we get data.
Okay.
And so you may argue with how we define them, but we're sort of limited in how we do this. And so St. Matthews would have multiple neighborhoods within it.
Okay. So, for instance, if you live in Clifton, you live along Frankfort Avenue someplace, you can go online on the Kentucky State Data Center or the United Way's website and see basically the profile of who your neighbors are.
Exactly.
What's the average income? How old are the folks that live around you? Those kinds of things, right?
Exactly. Mortality, fertility, all types of data.
Okay.
We really think that there's nothing bad that can come of you knowing more about your neighbors. Is sort of our thought.
All right. Well, let's talk about a little of the statistics. You sent me the economic characteristics and the characteristics of the Smoketown neighborhood, and you also have a column there of Jefferson County. So there were some interesting things that I found about Jefferson County. One was that I was a little surprised by the fact that it's 70% white. I thought, frankly, Jefferson County was a little more diverse than that. Were you surprised by the numbers? Or, of course, you've been following the numbers for years and years and years, so you probably weren't surprised. But
I was not surprised in particular, no.
Okay. Were you surprised by the number of, 7% foreign born?
It's actually a good number. It's been increasing a lot, and that was a significant gain since the last time that it was measured. I sort of feel like it might be somewhat undercounted. This group might be a little bit undercounted.
Because some aren't coming out of the woodwork because they're illegal or in the country, overstayed their green cards or whatever? Or
I wouldn't even go that far. I would just say that they're maybe not, if you don't speak the language, then you're maybe less likely to respond to these types of surveys.
To a census
whether or not,
survey,
yeah, whatever your status is.
I got you. All right, and a couple other things that I found were interesting was the total population below the federal poverty line, 16% in Jefferson County, and population under 18 below the federal poverty line. This is kids that are in poverty, 24%. That's a big number.
It is a big number, and this is the disparity here. The difference here is because poorer families tend to be larger, more or less. But that's a quarter of the kids in the county that are living under the poverty line. And I don't know if you're familiar with the poverty line, but it's low as it is.
What is it? What is it for a family of four?
For a family of four, it's about $24,000
a year. Wow,
a year. Yes. And when you consider most people are paying about 50% of their income on rent, that doesn't leave a lot of money for other things.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of discussion over the years of changing how the poverty rate is calculated. Nothing has come of these, but
yeah.
This is why we provide also the near poverty level there in that same document. So whether you're like 200% of the poverty level, or because this is still really close, right?
We're talking again with Matt Ruther from the Kentucky State Data Center. One other thing that, there's several things in here I found interesting, but one thing that really struck me was in Smoketown, which is an area just south of Broadway, basically, the Smoketown neighborhood. 28% of the households there don't have a car. 10% of Jefferson County households don't have a car. That surprised you?
It is. I mean, it is a lot for this particular.
That is a hell of a lot of people
county.
that don't have a vehicle.
Yeah. I mean, in the central neighborhoods, though, well, for one, there's some lower income neighborhoods that cars are expensive, but TARC is much more extensive in some areas than others, and so in Smoketown you can get by without a car.
That's true. You can walk a lot of places and get on the bus.
You can walk a lot of places. Of course, getting to a grocery store is always going to be an issue there because
in the downtown area, it is for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty high number.
Yeah. Was there anything else in this survey when you compare Jefferson County and Smoketown that surprised you or that worried you or as you looked at that neighborhood?
Not the Smoketown neighborhood necessarily. That was just the one that I sent you.
Okay. Were there any of Shively or wherever else you looked at that surprised you?
Not necessarily. There's a lot of them.
Yeah, there's a lot. Well, there's 80 of them, like you said.
And there's a lot of data in all of them.
And you can go find it on the Kentucky State Data Center website, right?
Yeah. And I should mention we're in the process of doing this for the outlying counties also. So Oldham and Shelby and Bullitt and the counties in Indiana, because we've had good responses on these from other people.
Why is it important that the Kentucky State Data Center look at these census numbers and break down this data and relay it to the public?
I think a lot of times when people see these numbers that the Census Bureau puts out, they might take them as a given, so they don't do any additional analysis. And there's always stories behind the numbers that we can help sort of tease out. And a lot of times these numbers aren't really very obvious what they're talking about, right? So this broadband idea, this is something confusing, and it's our job to help interpret these for people that are not familiar with them.
Okay, Matt, it's always great talking to you. Always a lot of interesting stuff, at least to me. I hope it's interesting to our listeners because I find this stuff really fascinating.
Well, it's my job, so it has to be interesting to me.
Well, let's hope it's interesting to you. All right, Matt Ruther, the Executive Director of the Kentucky State Data Center. Appreciate you being on the show. Roman Yampolskiy is an associate professor of computer science at UofL who has written books about artificial intelligence and some other topics. He's always tackling the hard questions about how computers, software, and our manufactured intelligence are evolving or perhaps not evolving to meet our future needs. Roman, always good to see you. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me again, Mark.
All right. You wrote a paper, and you talked about software, and you basically, as I understand your paper, said that it's not evolving fast enough. Is that a fair assessment of what you wrote about? Or why don't you explain it?
Close enough, but the paper is about evolutionary algorithms, which is
EA, as you described it, right?
Right. So we take what biologists call evolution, Darwinian evolution, and we try to simulate it in a computer, trying to get the same performance where it finds solutions to problems.
Okay.
You encode some sort of a difficult challenge as a bunch of solutions, and they compete. And the better ones propagate, they have children, and hopefully you'll get a real solution to a real problem. It works beautifully in many domains. Optimization, you have some sort of a design, you need to make it more efficient, works really well. There is a new hot area called neuroevolution, where you're evolving brains, neural networks.
Okay.
So you make them compete, better ones get to reproduce. Again, you have much better performance. But I was curious, why don't we just evolve software directly? Like, why do I have a job as a programmer? Like, it makes no sense to pay me, lots of money per hour, then we can just evolve those things. And so I looked at the field as a whole, trying to understand, well, what's the state of the art? And what's interesting, there is lots of papers with titles like, we evolved this, we evolved that. But then you start reading it, they didn't. That's the thing. So it works amazingly well in some domains and doesn't work at all for evolving source code.
Okay.
And that's essentially what the paper is about.
All right, so give me a for instance of something that you're trying to solve one of these problems. You invoke the name of Darwin, I think, this Darwinism to look into the future, progress into solving some problem, and we just don't have the software evolution to do that to let the computers do it. In other words,
Right, so
give me a for instance.
So the problems it's good at is where you can gradually improve the solution. So let's say you have a delivery service and you need to deliver to 20 locations. What's the optimal way to get there?
UPS has figured out to take all right turns.
Right, so they work with it, but that's optimizing for something else. If we're just looking to optimize distance, for example, if you just randomly generate a path, you'll still get to all 20 destinations, but it's not optimal. You realize, well, what if I go here first and then turn? It's an improvement. So as long as there is a gradual path to the solution, evolutionary algorithms work beautifully. But if you give it a problem such as write a program to replace Windows operating system, it doesn't work. In the paper, I try to understand why. Do we not have enough computational resources? Is there not a clear enough reward signal? Well, this is a good operating system, this is a bad one. So basically looking at why we're not doing it and what can we do to actually get there, because it's very important. If we can automate this process, we can develop better software quicker, we can make progress in artificial intelligence with those solutions. And as I said, we are starting to do it with evolving neural networks, which is essentially a bypass. We can get this thing to gradually get there. What if we just evolve brains, and then the brains can design new systems?
Well, now you're scaring me, though. You're talking about evolving brains. You're not talking about evolving human brains, because...
Well, better, much better, right? Human brains are limited. We can make it bigger. We can give it more access to data. So you probably heard about deep neural networks, machine learning.
I have heard of that. I'm not sure what it is, but I've heard of it.
Oh, that's beautiful. So instead of writing software just like a recipe, you have take 2 eggs, break them, whatever.
Right.
You just collect data about the problem. Whatever problem you're trying to solve, you have lots of examples. This is what we like, this is what we don't like. And you create this simulation of a neural network. It's just a statistical model, really. And you throw the data at it, lots and lots of data, big data for a deep network. It learns the answers, and then you give it new examples. It's better than a human, in many cases, at giving you the right answers.
Okay.
Most of the time, we don't know how it does that. We can't explain it, but the answers are right.
Yeah. And this coming from the guy who worries us all the time about artificial intelligence taking all the jobs, right?
Well, that was one of the concerns. So if we evolve AI instead of designing it, we have less control over what it is and how it works. So that was exactly the reason I started looking at this problem. So initially, I was like, aha, we can't evolve software directly. That's good. That means we're not going to screw up. But then neuroevolution, we're actually evolving brains directly. And we have no idea how they work. There's a black boxes which already been shown to have different types of bias, different types of failure modes.
Yeah. All right. Well, again, we're talking to Roman Yampolskiy, who is an associate professor of computer science at the University of Louisville. He's written a number of books and papers and things on computers, artificial intelligence, and other things. Should we be concerned that, at least in your mind, we're not developing software fast enough to meet our future computational needs?
Well, there are benefits to it. So we have lots of students we can recruit because there's a huge need for computer scientists in general, but also machine learning experts, AI experts, cybersecurity experts, cryptocurrency experts. All of it is ridiculously underappreciated in terms of the numbers we need to have. So my courses grew from 10 students to 70 in a few years. That's not even close to where it needs to be to satisfy the market. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, it's very good for us. If we could automate, software engineering process, then most of us would not have jobs unless you're tenured. So there are pros and cons, but the problem is we need this capability, and we're looking at different ways to at least help programmers. Maybe you can't evolve the whole thing, but you can optimize a part of it or help them.
And just to be clear, we're not talking about software engineers to make new video games. We're talking about software to solve really super-duper complex problems, right?
Well, it doesn't matter. All of it is software. So whatever you want, a super-duper game world simulating real one, which is very useful for experiments in physics and simulations, or you're talking about some specific software cancer detection, all of it is the same from certain point of view. You have inputs coming in, some data, you expect certain outputs. So yeah, if we can automate the process, it would work in any domain.
All right, so what are you teaching your students at the University of Louisville that are going to be the programmers and the software developers and others of the future? What are you teaching them to get them there?
I started the basics, just programming, old school, C, C++, and then my advanced students, they take artificial intelligence course with me where we do cover evolutionary algorithms and they employ them to solve real-world problems.
And evolutionary algorithms, what is that? In the simplest of terms, what is that?
So it's a computer simulation of biological evolution. You create a population of answers. Just randomly. Bad answers, stupid answers, diverse answers,
I got lots
weird
of those.
answers. Exactly. But then you evaluate them, you go, those 50 answers are much better than those 50. We remove the bad ones, we keep the good ones, and we let them reproduce. They kind of share answers, like students cheating on an exam, like, what do you have for B? Okay. After a while, they get better and better. And if you keep running it for millions of generations, you get really decent solutions. And that's what we see with some evolutionary processes, and that's what we try to repeat in a computer.
Talking with Roman Yampolskiy, Associate Professor of Computer Science in the Speed School of Engineering at UofL. A couple more questions real quick. Is money a factor in the reason, in your mind, we're not producing enough software or not developing enough software for the future? Is that playing any role, or you would think there'd be, tons of potential here.
The industry is really well financed. It's really a human factor. We don't have enough human resource. There is not enough top professionals. And what's interesting, lots of programmers are good, but a few who are excellent are 10 times as productive as an average guy. So that's what we need. We need more people who can accomplish a month's worth of work in 20 minutes.
So there's a big gap between the guys that are really good.
And it's a pay gap as well. If you're one of those people, you can write your own check. You decide how much you make.
Okay.
But there is a limit. You can't turn every single person into a top programmer.
And who are the companies that are really pushing the envelope on the software development, in your mind? Are there 2 or 3 beasts out there worldwide?
So again, it's about AI, machine learning, and the best. Google's DeepMind, Facebook has an excellent AI research program. There is OpenAI, which is a non-profit, but they're doing excellent work. The big fancy names, NVIDIA, Tesla is doing great work.
Okay. All right. We didn't get a chance to go into your stand-up routine, which you usually use on this show, Roman, but we'll have to have you back to get you to do that.
I will come back just for that. I have a paper coming up on artificial humor, so we'll get
Artificial humor? Well, that's what we all have, right? Artificial humor?
We have natural stupidity.
All right. Roman Yampolskiy, Associate Professor of Computer Science at UofL. Appreciate you being on the show, as always. Thanks for listening to UofL Today with Mark Hebert, and go Cards.